When you hear the word psychedelics, what's the first image that pops into your head? Is it like tie-dye and free love? Maybe some wild old scientific experiments? Or maybe that this is your brain on drugs thing from way back? Well, get ready, because the true history of these mind-altering substances is far richer, more ancient, and honestly pretty jaw-dropping. Way more than you might think.
You've absolutely hit on why this is such a compelling topic. That's exactly the fascinating journey we're starting today. We're doing a deep dive guided by Adeick's Audible original, The History of Psychedelics. And what's really counterintuitive, something the source makes incredibly clear, is just how deeply interwoven these substances are with human culture. We're talking everything from, ancient sacred rituals right up to modern medical breakthroughs. And often in ways that really challenge our modern ideas about healing, wisdom, even how we define reality itself.
Okay, that's a powerful start. When you say ancient, how far back are we really talking? I always kind of thought of these as mostly a 20th century thing, but you're saying it goes way, way before that.
Absolutely, way before. The search for what we might call mind-manifesting experiences, it stretches deep, deep into human history. This isn't new at all. There's archaeological evidence that strongly suggests mind-altering plants were used thousands of years ago, like ancient Egyptian stone carvings. They show mushrooms used in ceremonies, probably for royalty, maybe to grant power or guidance. And you see similar stuff in ancient Hindu traditions, linking Shiva, the destroyer, with certain plants. And in China, cannabis wasn't just like for rope. It was used in ceremonies and herbal medicine for over 8,000 years. It shows us a really long global human connection.
8,000 years. Whoa. Okay, that completely flips the script on the common narrative.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely not just a recent thing. And the names themselves, psychedelic, hallucinogen, and entheogen, they sort of hint at different ways of looking at these plants, right?
They absolutely do. The terms themselves really tell a story about how perspectives have changed over time. Initially, a lot of Western scientists went with hallucinogen. It comes from Latin, meaning to wander in the mind, and it kind of carried these ideas of madness or maybe even poison.
Right.
But then in 1956, you have Aldous Huxley, after this really profound mescaline trip, and the psychiatrist Humphrey Osmond, they coined psychedelic.
Yeah.
They described it as meaning mind manifesting. Because Huxley felt, as he put it, like he glimpsed a doorway to a new way of perceiving the world, not just, wandering. Then later, 1979, ethnobotanists wanted a term that better captured that spiritual dimension, so they came up with entheogen. It means something like generating the divine within, or plant teachers. It emphasizes their mystical quality, drawing from the Greek for inspired or full of God. Same root as enthusiasm, actually.
Plant teachers. I love that phrase. It just completely shifts the view, doesn't it?
Yeah.
From something maybe dangerous or just for kicks to something with actual wisdom, maybe purpose. Can you give us a solid example of how a plant teacher was seen and used back then?
Certainly. A great example is from Mesoamerica, the San Pedro cactus. It might be the oldest known hallucinogenic plant in the Americas. There are carvings showing its use going back as early as 1500 BC.
Wow.
And for the people there, it wasn't just a plant. It was known as something that awakens, something that allows communication with the spirit world for healing, for guidance. Similarly, down in the Amazon, you have the ayahuasca brew. It's made by combining different plants, and native people have used it since, time immemorial for deep healing, divination, spiritual connection. Adeick really explains that these cultures didn't primarily see poison or madness. They saw a tool, a pathway for knowledge, insight, connection, the context, the intention that was everything.
That contrast is just stark.
Yeah.
This idea of plant teachers feels so different from how most of us learned about this stuff growing up. It sounds like there must have been a real clash when Western science, with its focus on isolating chemicals, ran into these ancient holistic ways. How did those two views collide?
Oh, indeed. The history Adeick lays out is really marked by this profound tug of war. Not just science versus religion, but completely different attitudes towards these substances. Take mescaline, for example. It was isolated from the peyote cactus back in 1897 by a German pharmacologist, Arthur Hefter. And that chemical isolation, that was a huge moment, because it let scientists reduce the whole experience down to basically a pharmacological reaction, which was, a stark break from how indigenous groups used peyote. They consumed the whole cactus bowl within a ritual context, lots of ceremony, preparation, integration afterwards. And as the source highlights, the indigenous peyote men, they always insisted that the context mattered deeply. That to really interpret the visions, to get true insight, you had to pay attention to the whole ritual, not just swallowing a chemical.
So essentially, Western science was maybe missing the forest for the trees. by reducing it all down to just a chemical compound. What did that mean for how those indigenous practices were treated then?
Precisely. Yeah, often it led to devaluing them or even outright suppression of that indigenous knowledge. But what's really crucial here, and Dick emphasizes this, is how resilient these indigenous practices were. The Native American Church, the NAC, it emerged in the 20th century kind of as this pan-indigenous response to colonialism, to persecution, to huge cultural loss. It codified older practices, offered spiritual guidance, and really importantly, provided a way to heal these deep generational wounds. Leaders like Quanah Parker, they were incredibly skillful. They advocated for Christian principles through peyoteism, framing peyote as a sacred sacrament for healing. This wasn't just about having visions, it was about dealing with the profound trauma of cultural destruction, which, raises this really big question for us today. How do we genuinely value and integrate different knowledge systems, especially when one has been so historically marginalized?
That's such a powerful insight, linking it directly to healing from colonialism. It really highlights how deep these substances were tied to identity, to resilience. But did any Western scientists ever kind of bridge that gap? Did anyone learn from the indigenous ways instead of just isolating the chemicals?
Yes, definitely. There were some really key moments of integration, though maybe not enough. Humphrey Osmond, the psychiatrist we mentioned who helped coin psychedelics, he actually did something pretty groundbreaking. He went and attended a Native American church ceremony himself in 1956. Yeah. And it wasn't just like academic tourism, it deeply influenced his work. He later testified to governments about how important the NAC was as both a religious practice and a healing intervention. He noted its amazing potential to reduce alcohol addiction among indigenous people. He wrote, and Dick includes this quote, "I felt that the Indians and I were we. I was of their world."
Wow.
That experience significantly shaped his emphasis on set and setting, the personal mindset and the environment they're in for psychedelic therapy. That was a concept he directly learned from the NAC's approach. The drums, the hymns, the fasting, the whole ceremonial container, which was totally different from just taking a pill in a clinic. He got that the container was just as important as the contents.
I feel like a critical shift in understanding.
Yeah.
Emphasizing the environment, the mindset. Okay, so moving from these ancient plant teachers into the lab, LSD. I mean, that's such an iconic name, right? Especially from the 60s. But its beginnings were actually pretty different, weren't they? It started out as a potential psychiatric tool.
Exactly. Yeah, the LSD story is a real roller coaster. April 19th, 1943, Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann takes the first intentional LSD trip. We now call it Bicycle Day. He'd synthesized it from ergot, which is a fungus, initially for pharmaceutical research. It wasn't meant to be recreational at all. Hoffman called it his problem child because it had this power to both enchant and terrify. In those early years, psychiatrists like Osmond saw huge therapeutic potential. They used LSD to create what they called a model psychosis. The idea was to try and understand, maybe even empathize with, mental illness by experiencing something like it temporarily. But maybe even more striking, LSD showed really significant success in treating alcoholism. Osmond, for instance, he oversaw about 2,000 cases between 52 and 62. He linked the spiritual insights people had on LSD to ideas of a higher power, kind of like Alcoholics Anonymous does. Dak mentioned some studies back then reported like an 80% success rate in staying sober after just one session, which was just unheard of.
Yeah. An 80% success rate. For alcoholism treatment. That's truly incredible, especially for that time.
Yeah.
Why do you think that specific use was so successful? And what did it maybe suggest about addiction treatment?
Well, the source suggests that success probably came from LSD's ability to trigger these really profound, often spiritual experiences that could fundamentally shift how someone saw their life, their addiction. Those insights, combined with the therapy around it, seem to be this powerful catalyst for change. But yeah, that's where the story gets really complicated.
Okay.
Because despite all this promising clinical work, LSD's effects, which are profound, but also incredibly varied and subjective, they just didn't fit neatly into the new gold standard for research that was emerging in the 50s. The randomized controlled trial, the RCT.
Ah, right, the RCTs.
Exactly. Those trials were all about finding objective, repeatable reactions. Compare a drug to a placebo, measure the difference, and the idea that maybe the therapist needed personal experience with psychedelics, like Osmond suggested, that clashed completely with this big push for scientific objectivity, for standardization.
So the very nature of the experience itself was kind of at odds with the scientific methods taking hold back then. But this is also when LSD jumps from the clinic into the counterculture, right? How did that happen, and why did it end up getting banned?
That's exactly where the tension just exploded. While researchers were grappling with how to study it therapeutically, you had figures like Timothy Leary. After he got fired from Harvard, he basically became an evangelist for psychedelics, famously urging people to tune in, turn on, drop out.
Right, that phrase.
Which, depending on how you look at it, was either revolutionary or, maybe a really good way to lose your Harvard job. Anyway, LSD became tied up with the Beat generation, the whole burgeoning hippie counterculture. It influenced art, music, think Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, and these broader social movements that were really challenging the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
And that highly visible connection to rebellion, unfortunately, got it labeled as, like, public enemy number one in the war on drugs.
Yeah.
As Duck details, you had sensationalized media coverage, huge political pressure, and it all culminated in LSD being prohibited in the U.S. and then globally in the 1970s.
So what started as this scientific exploration with maybe huge therapeutic promise turned into a cultural lightning rod.
Yeah.
And then got pushed completely underground. What did that mean for how it continued to evolve? You mentioned a different kind of evolution.
Indeed, yeah. Trying to suppress it just pushed everything underground. And that led to this entirely different way knowledge evolved. It wasn't lost, not at all. It was preserved, even advanced, but outside official channels, by these really dedicated, often independent researchers and practitioners who were basically operating in the shadows. This sort of underground ecosystem was crucial for keeping the flame alive for decades. You had figures like Alexander Sasha Shulgin, a chemist who synthesized like over 200 psychoactive compounds. He continued to explore and openly share his knowledge, often really focusing on transparency and harm reduction, things that weren't always front and center in mainstream science during the ban years. So this shadow world, even without official stamps of approval, maintained this lineage of understanding that turned out to be pretty vital for what came next.
Okay, so now after decades underground, we're seeing this quote-unquote psychedelic renaissance. We hear about decriminalization efforts, celebrities talking about it, athletes like Aaron Rodgers, innovators like Steve Jobs, even the FDA giving breakthrough therapy status for some treatments. Is this really a new dawn? Or is it possible we're just, I don't know, romanticizing the past or maybe even repeating some of the old mistakes?
That's a very fair and I think really crucial question to ask right now. If we connect this to the bigger picture, yeah, the word renaissance implies a rebirth, and there's definitely renewed, serious scientific interest, no doubt about that. Today, the view is shifting. Psychedelics are seen less as drugs to drop out with, and more as potentially powerful therapies to help people live more fully within society. They're being studied for things like PTSD in veterans, severe depression, end-of-life anxiety. Dick shares the story of Thomas Hartle in Canada, a man facing terminal cancer who found profound peace and less anxiety about dying through psilocybin-assisted therapy. Psilocybin being the compound in magic mushrooms. It allowed him to reconnect with his family in really meaningful ways in his last months. So the shift in perception, public and medical, it's significant.
But doesn't this raise that important question again? In this push for medicalization, are we just kind of tailoring these powerful tools for Western tastes, maybe overlooking their really rich cultural pasts, the lessons from indigenous worldviews? Are we, basically just trying to put magic mushrooms into an expensive regulated pill and maybe losing something vital in translation?
Precisely. That's really the heart of what the source calls the aesthetic divide we see today. You've got the slick, medicalized image on one hand, and then the romanticized, maybe sometimes idealized, countercultural past on the other. And while the scientific revival is exciting, absolutely, there's a genuine danger. If we push psychedelics only through existing medical and economic frameworks, we might accidentally, or maybe not so accidentally, cut them off from their cultural roots.
Right.
And that could mean overlooking really important historical lessons, like issues of past discrimination, for example, how women were excluded from some shamanic practices, or even the whole colonial legacy, where indigenous knowledge was often exploited without proper credit or reciprocity. This isn't just about getting the science right this time around. It's about acknowledging a really complex, sometimes messy history and making sure we actually learn from it, rather than just, rebranding and remonetizing these things. We have a chance to be more thoughtful.
Okay, so if listeners remember just one thing from this whole deep dive, what would you want that key takeaway to be?
The one key thing, I'd say it's this. Psychedelics are not just chemicals. They're not just magic pills. Their profound impact, their full potential, really emerges when we understand their intricate historical, cultural, and spiritual contexts. We have this opportunity right now not just to rediscover them, but maybe to reconcile our whole approach to them, integrating all these diverse knowledge systems, but doing it responsibly and ethically.
I love that. Yeah, it's simple but really profound. It's a story that's way bigger than any single drug or any single movement, isn't it? It's really about how humans have always searched for meaning, for healing, for connection. Thanks so much for breaking all that down for us.
My pleasure. It's a fascinating history.
So if you're as intrigued as we are by this incredibly rich, really nuanced history, we definitely recommend diving deeper into the source material we used for this deep dive. That's Eric Gauck's The History of Psychedelics from the Great Courses. You'll find links to the Audible original and some more info right there in our show notes.
And definitely let us know what resonated with you most. Jump into the comments. What part of this journey from ancient plant teachers to modern therapies surprised you the most? Thinking about this whole complex past, what do you think our biggest responsibility is as these substances come back into the mainstream? Your thoughts are really part of this ongoing conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, maybe by understanding this nuanced, sometimes uncomfortable history of psychedelics, we can approach them not just as medicines, but maybe as catalysts. Catalysts for rethinking bigger questions about health, about culture, about our place in the world, and hopefully, avoiding the mistakes of the past and helping foster a more holistic future.